I want to ask you exactly, what do you believe really is the significance of the ceasefire at this point?
Well, the main significance is it acknowledges a tremendous Turkish success. They basically have acquired what they intended was this security zone of about 20 miles deep and all along the border. Varies in length right now, according to reports from the ground, on exactly where they're at, but basically we're acknowledging that, allowing them to have that, and they've gotten that now because if this actually works and it's sustained beyond 120 hours, any of the tariffs that the president at least has threatened against Turkey will not occur, so they've basically accomplished their task at no particular pain to President Erdogan.
120 hours, that's 5 days for a ceasefire to take place. I've spent a great deal of time covering wars in the Middle East, and if you were to tell the Israelis we're going to give Hamas 120 hours for the ceasefire to take place, they would not have gone for something like that.
No, absolutely not. A whole lot of different things can go wrong in that 120 hours. It's curious, though, there's an upcoming meeting between President Erdogan and President Putin in Sochi within that 120 hours. So I'm wondering if perhaps the real decisive meeting is exactly that one for Erdogan and Putin to sort things out, because, of course, people who are not signatories to this agreement are first and foremost the Syrian government in Damascus, and they're moving their forces up along this area, nor are the Russians, who are the strongest supporters of the Syrian government, and we haven't heard from them. But that meeting will occur within this window, and I think that's why it was timed in this fashion.
And at this point, the president said he's leaving it open about this potential meeting with Erdogan and the president, President Trump. What do you think could happen, and how confident are you that within this 120 days there will be a positive outcome that the ceasefire holds?
Well, I'm not very confident at all. I mean, the Turks basically have got what they have accomplished, though the area that actually they're going to be ceded to them is still ill-defined. And it looks like there'll be a substantial number of Kurds who have to leave areas which are really their homelands, and whether they can be sustained and not reigniting some kind of violence remains to be seen. As I said, haven't heard from the Russians, haven't heard from the Syrian government, haven't heard from our European allies whether they're going to buy into this and not enforce sanctions they've already called upon. And frankly, I'll be very surprised if many on Capitol Hill, on both sides of the aisle, Republicans as well as Democrats, find this less satisfactory and actually now move forward with additional sanctions, despite what the president said.
I want to ask you before you go, one thing that the president said right here when he addressed reporters was this was an unconventional solution. A conventional solution is to sit down and negotiate. That wasn't going to work. What do you make of the president's comments about that?
Well, I just frankly think the president's wrong. What was going on was the situation was actually working. We had a force there. That particular force monitored the border. That force had begun doing joint patrols with the Turks, had convinced the Syrian Kurds to move back some heavy weaponry and some fortification to stabilize things, and that force was serving as a deterrent from a Turkish attack into Syria. And by removing them in a precipitous fashion, opened up this Pandora's box. We now have a couple 100,000 refugees who are barely going to be satisfied with this solution. Unclear how many of these ISIS fighters have escaped. The president has tried to reassure us that they'll all be recovered. That's unclear. We still don't know how big this zone is going to be. And last but not least, very vague thoughts about how do you enforce this thing if, in fact, it goes beyond 120 hours. It's curious. The president said, well, we'll be watching it. I mean, is he suggesting U.S. forces are now going back in there as peacekeeping? Or are we going to go to a third party? And in any of these kind of agreements, if they're going to last for a period of time, there's got to be some mechanism to ensure enforcement on both sides.
Lieutenant Colonel Jeff McCausland, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.